What is indeed the meaning of life? If at all there is some meaning to this seeming accident on the axis of time and space, something that doesn't begin because we wanted it and something that ends because we willed it, something that seems to be quite independent of us, but something which we have to live. What does it all add up to? This is a question that has bothered humanity from the beginning of times. And this question was posed in 1930 by a very famous American author, a kind of dilettantist philosopher, thinker on human culture, history, etc., a multifarious intellectual called Will Durant, whose works have been a source of immeasurable intellectual delight for me, and I commend them to you. You can perhaps begin with the simplest of his books, The Meaning of Life, though that question is perhaps the most difficult to handle. So, in order to initiate a global discussion on the meaning of life, Will Durant formulated a letter in 1930 and sent out copies of the letter to 100 foremost intellectuals at that time. 3 of them were from India, and I've already shared with you a video analyzing or considering the response of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru to that question raised by Will Durant. And I'm glad to see that many of you have seen that video and taken a degree of interest in it that actually exceeded my expectation. And I did that as a kind of trial balloon to see if I should continue with this process. And encouraged by your responses, I am now proceeding to share with you further and further response to the question that Will Durant raised. I believe it's a central question on which we must exercise our thinking process continuously for as long as we live. There is a good reason for it. And in order to underline that reason, let me invoke another very respected name, but this name is in the domain of science, Albert Einstein, a household name globally. Even if you are not a scientist, you are sure to have heard of and perhaps known something about the work of Albert Einstein, and at least cultivated a nodding acquaintance with 2 of his books, both of which are available on the net. Now, in that video, the first of its kind that I shared with you, detailing Jawaharlal Nehru's response, I did not include Durant's assessment of an appreciation for that letter. So today I want to begin by reading out a short passage in which Durant expresses Jawaharlal Nehru's expresses his appreciation for Nehru's response and his respect for the stature of Nehru as a thinker and a global citizen. And then I'll go on to share with you the text of C.V. Raman's response to Durant's letter. But let me first share with you what Durant said about Nehru's response. It is a noble spirit that speaks here, referring to Nehru. It is a noble spirit that speaks here. The moral idealism of mankind burns more brightly in India than anywhere else in our world today. I wish people would say the same thing about India today. Today, of course, we have made a national virtue of denouncing Nehru and caricaturing him, stigmatizing him as the greatest curse that has happened to India, and that the best thing we can do in order to create the new India, to wipe the slate of India clean of the memory of Jawaharlal Nehru, so on and so forth. But this is actually the truth, internationally acclaimed truth. It was because of individuals like Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and the team that comprised Gandhi's Soldiers for Indian Freedom, that globally the respect for India, the moral light that India was, peaked at that time. And I cannot help repeating those words where Will Durant says, "The moral idealism of mankind burns more brightly in India than anywhere else in our earth today. To have a great purpose to work for, a purpose larger than ourselves, is one of the secrets of making life significant." And in one of my earlier videos, I quoted the words of Arnold Toynbee, perhaps the greatest historian the 20th century has seen, a British historian, and his classic study of the various civilizations that have come and gone. The title of that series is A Study of History, where after 25 years of hard work, which resulted in the production of this monumental work, Arnold Toynbee, reviewing his life, said that he felt truly grateful for the singular blessedness of having had a mission in his life. And here, Will Durant says almost exactly the same thing: to have a great purpose to work for, a purpose larger than ourselves, is one of the secrets of making life significant. Please, let's endeavor to make our life significant rather than stay stuck in this puny, petty, infantile level of petty quarrels and jealousies. For then the meaning and worth of the individual overflow his personal borders and survive his death. Hear the same fine aspiration in this letter from another Hindu, the winner of 1930 Nobel Prize for Physics. Of course, that is C.V. Raman, as we know. And I proceed now to read C.V. Raman's response to the letter that Will Durant addressed to the 100 foremost intellectuals and moral luminaries of his times. This response by C.V. Raman is dated the 15th of October 1931. Now, here is the text, and I will not stop here and there to offer comments. I will read the text continuously, and if at all I find it absolutely essential to offer a comment or two at the end, having finished the text, then I might offer so, otherwise I'll conclude the video. Dear Mr. Durant, I have never believed that life is worth living simply for the moment's pleasure or tomorrow's trivial hope. The mind of man is too feeble an instrument fully to penetrate into the great mystery of this world where we find ourselves. But I have always thought that life would be worth living in order, please forgive me, life would be worth living in order to try and understand a little more of it than we do at present. The intellectual and scientific impulse has indeed been the mainspring of my life and activities. Religious rituals and dogmas possess no significance for me, but the teachings of Buddha or Christ, it doesn't say and, the teachings of Buddha or Christ, if not taken too literally, have a value which I recognize and which I believe time cannot diminish. The desire to labor, to achieve and to help others to do likewise. These are the motive powers which have kept me going. I find self-control and not self-indulgence to be the real source of happiness. In the last resort, to win a victory over oneself is a greater thing than conquering the whole world. With kind regards, I am yours sincerely, C.V. Raman. Now, I can't imagine a more meaningful and beautiful response than this. Though a short text, it contains practically everything. As a scientist, it's very significant that Dr. C.V. Raman retains and cherishes a sense of mystery about life. My dear friends, I cannot exaggerate the importance of this. What we have lost in our times is precisely the sense of mystery, of awe and wonder about life. Consequently, we cheapen, degrade, and reduce life to very meaningless, shallow, shadowy obsessions, desires, activities, and pursuits. And the more we do so, the more we turn our own life into a meaningless burden. And most people today, therefore, think of life with resentment, escalating resentment, which is a great pity. So, life in the end is a mystery. And as Soren Kierkegaard points out in one of his books, wherever we intuit mystery, we also intuit the presence of God. Kierkegaard, the philosopher, is of the opinion that God ultimately is an irreducible mystery, but it's sad how people who claim themselves to be religious and therefore very close to God talk very cheaply and in a shallow manner about God, as though God is some kind of a shallow phenomenon which they can decipher without any effort. Though the Bible repeatedly says that God's ways are mysterious and that human beings cannot fathom the will or purposes of God, and that all that we can do is to relate to God in faith. When a person becomes very pious and very, very religious, he begins to think of God as a kind of familiar man Friday, whose only job is to do the bidding of the person, except that the bidding is couched in the form of prayers and requests, which is extremely unfortunate. So, the more religious you are, unfortunately, the more crippled you become in relation to understanding the irresolvable mystery that God is. And when we lose sight of or lose an intuition about the mystery of God, we tend to cheapen and degrade God and make God subsidiary to our inclinations, dispensations, desires, ambitions, and advocacies. And that is how religion becomes a curse on humanity. So, the first thing the scientist tells us is that he has a great respect for and a continuous awareness of the mystery of life. The second thing, perhaps, that we must note is that C.V. Raman believes that we all have to bring some meaning to our life. He says, I sense the meaning of my life in terms of the great activities that I'm involved in. To the extent I feel that I'm totally absorbed in a kind of work that will prove beneficial to humanity, the fruits of which are not confined to my own profit and pleasure, I consider my life worth living. So, in other words, he has a great cause to live for. I remember reading a book about the plight of the youths in the 1960s and 70s, where I read, says the problem with the youth of today is that they have everything to live for, they have everything to live with, but nothing to live for. The youth of today have everything to live with, but nothing to live for. So that's something that I thought we could put side by side with what C.V. Raman is saying. Then the third important thing he says is that he attaches no significance whatsoever to religious rituals and dogmas. Any right-thinking person, any person who is honest with himself, any person who exercises a God-given gift of thinking will come to the same conclusion as C.V. Raman did, and 2000 years before him, Jesus Christ did the same thing. And 600 years before Jesus Christ, Lord Buddha said the same thing. That's the reason why C.V. Raman equates Lord Buddha and Jesus Christ. Though a Hindu, he remembers, or he mentions only two names here. Very interesting, because there are profound similarities between the two, Lord Buddha and Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, so C.V. Raman says, I attach zero importance to dogmas and rituals, whereas most religious people, in fact all religious people who think of themselves as pious believers, care only for rituals, rites, dogmas, doctrines, and they're not interested in anything else. So there's a very startling difference. Then he says the desire to labor, to achieve, and to help others to be delivered of this delusion about religion is, he says, is something that's worth doing. And then finally he says that the real secret of happiness in life is not self-indulgence but self-control, self-mastery. And that's what all spiritual traditions in the world teach. After all, in the Bible, self-control is exalted to the level of the gift of the Holy Spirit, the fruit of the Holy Spirit, self-control. But unfortunately, in this world, people who have no control over themselves want to control everybody else, if possible, the whole world. And a lion's share of the miseries, the tragedies of the world stem from this anomalous fact. That is, people who have no control over themselves, who want to control everybody else. So I think it's a gem of a letter, and I wish I had seen this letter when I was a little boy. I would have learned it by heart. It was far easier for me then to commit a text to heart. I could read a text of a letter of this kind 3 times, 4 times, and I could recite the whole thing. My memory was that good. Today, if I read it 20 times, I won't be able to do that. So my request to young people is, please make good use of your memory when you come across beautiful passages full of meaning. Please commit them to memory, because then that becomes part of your inner life. When you walk around, when in your moments of rest, you can mentally review these things and be nourished, continuously inwardly nourished by the thoughts and sentiments of these great souls. So this is a second of the two responses to Will Durant's letter or request to various thinkers of the world to give their idea about the meaning of life. In the next video, I shall deal with the response of Mahatma Gandhi. I'm sure you would all be eagerly looking forward to that. It's very interesting. Now, let me close by making a request. All of us get so completely absorbed with the mechanism of life or the mechanics of life, to the extent that unfortunately we become indifferent to the meaning of life. I use two words, mechanism and meaning. Actually, this is a modern failure more than anything else. Today we are obsessed with the mechanism of things, as a result of which we become blind and deaf to the meaning of things. And this is again something that Albert Einstein alerted me to. I remember reading in one of his books, Ideas, where he says the modern man is too preoccupied with processes to be mindful of the purpose of life. Whereas the great thinkers of the past, particularly the spiritual thinkers of the past, were more mindful of the purpose of life than the processes of life. The more absorbed with the processes of life we become, the more deaf and blind we become regarding the purpose of life. And I'm sure this for this reason that Jesus said, why do you worry about what you will eat, what you will drink, what you will wear? Why are you all the time obsessed with things of the body? And why don't you lift your imagination to higher things? After all, you're not just the body. You're not just a body. You're also a mind and a soul. And all the processes of life actually pertain to the body dimension, the physical dimension. I'm not saying that the physical dimension does not matter. I'm only saying that if only the physical dimension matters to us, that we are in no way better than any other animal. What really constitutes the difference between human beings and the other members of the animal kingdom is that we can raise our imagination and our quality of thinking to a level far beyond anything that any other animal can. Therefore, it's at that level that we need to really strategize and experience the uniqueness and worth of our personality. And to the extent that we fail to do so, we live our life in no way different from the way other animals live, and as a result of which, we begin to experience this nagging awareness of low self-worth, which serves like a canker inside the bud of a flower. The flower never opens and shows its potential beauty because inwardly it is being eaten up daily by the worm. And there is a worm within each one of us, and we need to become aware of that. And that worm is low self-awareness. And that low self-awareness is something that we bring down upon ourselves. It's possible to make a radical break with this and to turn in the direction of attaining incrementally, more and more, day by day, a greater and stronger and deeper sense of self-worth. And I believe that the most important purpose of spirituality, spiritual discipline in particular, is to grow and gain greater and higher levels of self-worth. And that's the reason why Jesus says, "You are the light of the world." Light is a symbol of the highest form of perfection. And we know that the more perfect anything is, the greater its worth or greater its value. The difference between an amateur painter and a piece by Da Vinci or Raphael or Titian is perfection, perfection. So, it's important for us to cultivate a higher level of self-worth. And freedom is given to us that we may seek and attain the highest possible level of self-worth. But freedom can be abused and turned into a snare both for ourselves and for others, as a result of which the abuse of freedom results in the utter destruction of whatever rudimentary self-worth there might be, which is a great pity. And that's tantamount to death. So, the question that Bill Durant raised is an important question. It's a question that we need to keep right at the center of our consciousness and perhaps make that as a point of continuous referral to anything, for anything and everything that happens, and about, especially in relation to the choices that we make. When we come across any situation where we have to make a choice, may the choices be made with a reference to this question: what is the meaning of life? What's the meaning of my life? What's the purpose of my life? And will this choice harmonize with the worth and dignity that I have, the worth and dignity that I need to not only cherish and not only preserve, but also cherish and enhance day by day? It's when we have that commitment to our own self-worth, to increasing and celebrating it, that life becomes worth living. Only then will we be convinced that there is a purpose and meaning to life. It's futile, I would say impossible, to convince a person who lives like an animal to believe that life has a great meaning, life has a great purpose, life is noble, life is great, life is godly, life is divine, because it's something that's completely incompatible with the orientation that that person has willfully inflicted upon himself. So, C.V. Raman's response to Will Durant's letter, and I'm so very glad to have the opportunity to share that with you. In the next video, I'll share with you the response of the father of the nation, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Jai Hind.